Tonight's lesson is in the schos, in the merit of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yosef. His neshama, he just had his yahrzeit this past week. His neshama should have an elevation and an uplifting in Gan Eden. Okay, tonight is actually going to be, I think, a fascinating lesson. I think it's going to be a little bit historical. Hope you all can stay with me, but it's going to be quite interesting. And so we're going to talk about the Jewish taskmasters. These are the people that don't normally get discussed so much. Okay, so we're going to talk about something that you all know, but I'm sure that almost everyone watching is not fully aware of the greatness of these people we're going to talk about tonight. These are some amazing heroes we're going to talk about. Truly amazing, amazing people who, unfortunately, are not given the proper credit that they do, because the heroism that they display is not so explicit in the Bible. It's there, but they display tremendous heroism, tremendous courage. And tonight we're going to zoom in on them. We're going to discover their greatness and see what kind of lessons we can learn in our lives from the greatness of these people we're going to talk about tonight. So, in order to appreciate these heroes, the Jewish taskmasters, we're first going to need to talk a little bit about the bondage of the Jewish people in Egypt, the slavery of the Jewish people. When the Jews were enslaved in Egypt, they weren't just in physical bondage where they were physically enslaved and that they were forced to build pyramids and build these big, beautiful homes for storage homes for Pharaoh. The Egyptian bondage was a psychological manipulation and the psychological indoctrination and enslavement of the freedom of the Jewish people. And today, obviously, freedom is a big discussion, and the idea of slavery emotionally and emotional bondage is something that is still, unfortunately, very, very much real and alive in the minds of people today. And the story of the Egyptian slavery, if we're able to get past the physical slavery and understand that it's actually an emotional slavery. This was a story of Jews that were living in a state of absolute mental and emotional bondage to foreign forces, to the Egyptians. We'll see many, many lessons for us. But we need to understand the timeline of the Egyptian bondage to appreciate the story I'm going to share with you tonight. When you sit by your Seder table with your kids and you're like discussing the beautiful story of the Exodus from Egypt, it's very easy to think that the whole story of slavery took place very quickly. In fact, I'll ask you watching, how long was the entire story of the Egyptian bondage? How long did the entire Egyptian slavery take? You think the Jews were enslaved and then on came Moses, 10 plagues, boom, bam, blood, frogs, lice, and whatever, and we're free. The truth is, the story of the Jews becoming enslaved by the Egyptians is something that would take many, many, many decades in order to take place. Hello, Faith. Hello, Ashley. Hello, everyone that's watching. It took decades for this to happen. And so I'm going to spend a minute explaining to you the story, just the story, the timeline of how the Jews went from being not just a free people, but from being the heroes of Egyptian culture. They were the ones that had stopped the famine. Jacob was a hero. When Jacob passed away, the entire Egypt came to mourn the passing of this great hero. How they went from being this great people to this tremendous descent to being the slaves and the outcasts of society, it's an amazing transformation. And the truth is that this transformation happened many times since. The most recent time was in the Holocaust. People always ask about the Holocaust. How did it happen that the Jews who were as integrated into the German culture and German society as could possibly be imagined, and all of a sudden these Jews, now they became the subhuman enemy of the people? How could that happen? How could the Jewish people that were Germans and so integrated, and the Germans were so great, how could they become such an evil people so fast? Same question about the Egyptians. The Egyptians were culture. The Egyptians were considered the greatest society of the time. And yet somehow they became the most evil, wicked people. So let's go through this timeline for a minute. the Jewish people come to Egypt, that we all know. And eventually Jacob passes away. And then in the year 2332 after creation, in the year 2332 is the year that the last of the 10 tribes pass away, Levi. Now, from when Levi passes away until the Jewish people leave Egypt in the year 2448 is over 100 years of slavery. Over 100 years from when Levi passes away until the Jews are freed. Okay, we're talking about a long time, not like a few weeks. Now, the beginning of the first phase of slavery was 30 years. I'm on Zoom. There we go. There was 30 years of, hello, Yosef, all the way from Yeshiva, Morristown. So there was 30 years of slavery, of the first phase. We're going to go through 4 phases tonight. 4 phases of the Jews in suffering. Phase number 1 takes place from the year 2332 until the year 2362 after creation. So 30 years the Jewish people are in what's called hard labor. And basically what they're doing is they're building pyramids, they're building these massive storage centers, massive Amazon fulfillment centers for the Egyptian people. How does this begin? Very briefly, Pharaoh says we need to be patriots. We need to build up the strength of our country. We need to, we're not strong enough. We're not well protected. And so what happens is Pharaoh comes himself. He calls this massive, massive gathering of all the people. He says, my friends, it is time for us to go and to build up the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh himself comes with a shovel hanging from his neck, and he himself goes out to watch, to be part, to dig, to help build the bricks and to build the pyramids that will build up the national safety and security of the land of Israel, of the land of Egypt, sorry. And so all the Jews come running. They want to be good patriotic citizens. They want to come be noble and loyal. And they come and they all start working. And after a few weeks of working and they're building up all the pyramids and they're building the bricks, then Pharaoh says to the Jews, you got to keep on building the bricks, but you can't slack off. The same number of bricks you built in the beginning, you got to keep on doing it. And in the beginning, they were being paid, and then they stopped being paid, and then they wanted to stop, and they weren't allowed to, until the Egyptian taskmasters came and started to beat them and said, if you don't come back to work, we'll beat you. How dare you go against our country? Where's your loyalty to Mother Egypt? Where's your loyalty to your host country? And basically, very briefly, in the course of, I don't know, an exact number of weeks or months, the Jews went from being a free people to becoming indentured servants of Pharaoh, if you will, forced to do labor, but they still went home at night. They still had a family life. They still had their kids. They still had their family. And in the beginning, they were paid for it, and they weren't paid. And then the intensity of the beatings and of the working conditions increased. But they were given the materials. They were given food. The first 30 years. After 30 years, Pharaoh sees that the Jewish people are still having lots of kids. And they're still mass producing, and they're still having too many children for him to be able to handle. So now Pharaoh says it's time to increase the pressure on the Jewish people. Now we're going to start avodat perach. Now we're going to start the literally perach means back-breaking labor, the intense labor of the second phase of slavery. And there's many, many different descriptions and explanations for what exactly was the back-breaking, demoralizing labor of phase 2 of the Egyptian slavery that was so much worse than just the hard labor of phase number 1. There were many things. The Jewish people were forced to build construction and build homes on quicksand. So unlike the first 30 years where they were building pyramids that we still have till today, these massive, unbelievable the massive like wonders of the universe that we don't even know how they were able to build something so amazing. In this phase of slavery, they were building on quicksand. They were building buildings, and after they finished building the building collapsed. Can you imagine? You know, when you work really, really hard, okay, you worked hard for a month and you schwitzed and you slept and you whatever. But after a month of working, you look back and say, wow, look at what I accomplished. Look at this beautiful building standing here. There's a sense of gratification, a sense of accomplishment. The Jewish people, they finished working, and guess what? no sense of accomplishment, no nothing. The building they had built came crashing down. That's demoralizing. That's meant to degrade the human spirit. They would make the men do women's jobs and the women would do men's jobs. During this time, they wouldn't let the people go back home to their families. And they started forcing the Jewish slave laborers to sleep in the field. And they said to them, if you're going to go home, you're going to waste time, you have to sleep here. They would come early in the morning, in the middle of the night, and wake them up in the middle of the night to go do gardening and to do other odd, weird jobs. So they weren't able to sleep. They were no longer allowed to go home to their families. They weren't given proper food. So here already, you have now where they lost that freedom of going home and having your own supper and your own dinner. Now you're dependent on the Egyptian taskmasters for your survival because you're not even allowed to leave the workplace to go home. During that time, the Jewish women were tremendous heroines, and the Jewish women were so committed to continuing to have Jewish children and continuing to keep the future of the Jewish people alive that they would go out to the fields with mirrors, with makeup, with different stuff to beautify themselves, and they would come before their tired husbands that were sleeping in the field who were not allowed to go home after a full day of back-breaking slave labor. And they would come and they would beautify themselves with their makeup and their jewelry, and they would look in the mirrors and they would seduce their husbands and ensure that the Jewish people would be born. And after 5 years of this avodas perech, of this back-breaking, demoralizing, terrible, dehumanizing slave labor, came the next stage of throwing the babies into the Nile, killing the unborn children. First, Pharaoh calls the two midwives, Shifra and Puah, which is code names for Yocheved and Miriam, and says, I want you to kill all the baby boys as they're coming out of their mother's womb. Kill them at birth. Say they died. They were born dead. When they didn't do that, Pharaoh makes a decree that every single Jewish baby should be thrown into the Nile River. So at this point, the decree that every single Jewish child should be thrown into the Nile is already after 35 years of Jewish slavery. You have to understand, for a king to come and say, throw all babies in the Nile, you can't do that. Imagine if Hitler would come and say, we're throwing all the Jewish kids into the Nile. He couldn't do that in 1930 or 1935. But he passed the Nuremberg laws, and he passed, different stages of slowly degrading the human worth and the human value of the Jews, taking away their businesses, putting on restrictions, making them wear the yellow stars, etc., until eventually it would reach a point when people would understand we're going to kill the Jewish babies. Even that is not killing, that's not genocide. It's just killing the babies. And then finally came the final stage 5 years after that, where we came many years after that, which was the open genocide, where now already the Pharaoh was bathing. 80 years later, or 70-something, 80 years later. Now Moshe is born. You know the story, Moshe is born. We're going to talk about it in God willing next week. Batia, we talked about it last week. She saved the baby. For up to 12 years, different opinions. He was by his mother, 3 years, 2 years, 12 years. At the age of 18 years old is when Moshe kills the Egyptian taskmaster, and he's forced to run away for his life, and he runs first to Ethiopia and then to Midian, where he marries Zipporah. He lives there for many years. Moshe is 80 years old when God appears to Moses at the burning bush and says, Moshe, Moshe, I want you to go and save my people from the land of Egypt. 80 years, which means that the Jewish people, if they were already enslaved 35 years before Moshe was even born, we're talking now about 115 years of slavery before Moshe comes back to Pharaoh to say, let my people go. Okay? By now is already the fourth stage of slavery, where Pharaoh is bathing in the blood of Jewish children. Here's the phase that when the Jewish people don't finish their quotas of bricks that they have to make, Pharaoh would take Jewish kids and stuff them into the walls to fill the unfilled quota of bricks. So the Jews didn't meet the quota of bricks, not that they got whipped, or they were literally, kids were killed and stuffed into the walls as supplements for the bricks they missed. That's how bad the slavery got. So if you go through this, now let's do the psychological. You ready for a psychological story? We need to understand the mental, emotional suffering and sadistic evil game that Pharaoh played with the Jewish people's minds. So first, step number one is it makes them forget about Joseph. to rewrite history, to erase the past. That's the first step of every dictator. Every evil person makes you forget the past. And then he begins to trick the Jews. Let's be patriots. Let's go build the land of Egypt together. So the Jews join in. And then after counting the bricks and saying you need to produce the same, he switches their roles. Now they're not doing the women's jobs, etc., etc. This purposeless work, the dehumanizing of the Jewish people. Till the babies are being thrown in the Nile. When you throw the babies in the Nile, it's a whole new step of suffering. Because as long as you have hope for the future, as long as there's hope for the future, you say, okay, so I'm in bondage, but my kids will have a better life. And here what Pharaoh was doing was destroying the future. It's getting much, much worse. And each step of this bondage from the first three phases of slavery, over 115 years of slavery, still the Jewish people are being broken down and being dehumanized and being demoralized and being treated like subhuman creatures. And you would think that the Jewish people have lost their identity. You would think that they no longer have their own sense of worth. And yet, here we find something fascinating. We find that the Jewish people continue to use their Jewish names. They continue to use their Jewish language, Hebrew, not Egyptian, and they continue to use Jewish cultural clothing to identify themselves as Jews. Absolutely amazing. The Jewish people have been so demoralized, they've been so crushed, so tortured, so such hard work put on them, and yet they still maintain a Jewish identity. They still maintain a sense of pride in being Jews. That's amazing. And so now we come to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, I still have not destroyed the Jewish spirit. I've oppressed them. I've not only put slave labor on them, but I've dehumanized them. I've killed their children. I've made them open for genocide. The Egyptian people are willing to support me in openly killing Jews. And yet there's still a sense of Jewish identity. There's still a sense of Jewish connection between each other. It's time for the most potent, most dangerous weapon that I can use against the Jewish people. Do you know what that is? What is the most dangerous weapon that any dictator could use against us to destroy us? Anyone care to guess? The most dangerous thing, the most evil, wicked thing that a dictator can do to destroy the Jewish sense of identity, to destroy the sense of belonging and togetherness the Jewish people have that has kept them standing strong through thick and thin. Do you know what that is? I'm going to quote Himmler. Yimach Shema, he should be destroyed forever. Himmler, one of the main architects of the Jewish solution in Germany, he says as follows. I'm going to read you in a scary text. I can say quite candidly that it is not my job to featherbed anybody, but it is my job to rid the streets of subhumans and use them to bring us to victory. Camps hold the lowlifes from all the European nations, Jews and Russians and Poles and Czechs and Frenchmen. Wherever criminals are found in the territories under German occupation, they are sent to us. Because we can't get by with Germans only, we naturally arrange things so that a Frenchman is a capo in charge of the Poles, or a Pole is a capo in charge of the Russians, so that a nation is played off against another. This, my friends, is the words of a wise, evil, but wise man. Evil, wicked, disgusting human being. But he was right. The most effective way of destroying a spirit of pride that the Jewish people experienced was by dividing the Jewish people. By dividing, there would be, notice a divide and conquer. Here is divide and subdue. Divide and subdue. Pharaoh realized, I need to divide the Jewish people. They're still standing strong as a nation. They still have not lost their sense of identity and togetherness. And now we are ready to meet what is called in Hebrew the Shotrim, the Jewish officers. And I'm going to introduce you now tonight, my dear friends, to characters that are heroes of the Torah, heroes of our history that are forgotten. These are the Jewish officers that Pharaoh appoints to be in charge of the Jewish people. Now, these Jewish officers, what was their job? They had to be the overseers, to use contemporary language, the capos, the ones who would be in charge of seeing and counting and keeping track of the Jewish prisoners and slaves to make sure that they were properly doing their jobs and filling the quotas that Pharaoh had put upon them to make produce, to make bricks, etc. That's their job. So you're going to think, which kind of people are appointed to be capos? Who gets the job where they no longer have to be the slave laborers working themselves, but they get to sit under the umbrella and oversee the Jewish slaves and tell them to work harder? What kind of person gets that job? Normally, those who are loyal to the Egyptians, who have proven their willingness to I want to be nice in how I say this, who have proven their willingness to go the extra mile to please their Egyptian masters. How's that for a nice way of saying it? They want to go the extra mile to appease their Egyptian masters. So here we have an amazing thing. You have Pharaoh, who is an evil, diabolical ruler. He's wicked as wicked could be. He bathes in the warm blood of Jewish children. You understand what that means? I mean, I can't get over it. Take Jewish children, slaughter them, and as the blood comes out, it's hot. The blood is warm. To then collect that blood in a bath, and as the blood is still warm, to go sit and bathe in that blood. The level of evil that the brain has a hard time comprehending. It's like whatever, your brain can't comprehend that kind of wickedness, that kind of evil. So here's Pharaoh. Now, Pharaoh is unlike most dictators. I'll tell you something very interesting. Most dictators of history who are cruel rulers normally have very, very fragile egos, and they're afraid of their constituents. They hide away in their palace. They're paranoid. Hitler, Yimach Shmai, the end of his life, was paranoid. No one could get to him. Achashverosh, we know, for just to give contrast, Achashverosh, no one was allowed to see him. His own wife, the queen, wasn't allowed to go see him without permission from the king. She was worried to walk into her husband's chambers without being called. After 30 days, she hasn't spoken to her husband. Can you imagine? 30 days, I'll avoid the jokes, but 30 days, she's not allowed to speak to her husband. Terrible. And after 30 days, she says to Mordechai, I'm afraid to walk into this chamber without being called in. I may be killed. I may be punished. It's an amazing, that's how Achashverosh was. A dictator was afraid of the people. Pharaoh was not afraid of his people. Pharaoh, and this is fascinating, allows the people to come complain to him. He allows Moshe and Aaron to come and go back and forth time again, to threaten him, to warn him, to speak to the Jewish people. You don't see anywhere that Pharaoh does anything to limit the behavior of the Jewish people. I mean, he makes the Jews work hard. I'll talk about that in a second. But the Jews had access to Pharaoh. You don't see that Pharaoh punishes Moshe and Aaron, that he arrests them, he imprisons them, he kills them. Most dictators, you come to Hitler and say, let the Jews go free. What would Hitler do to you? Within a second, he would have killed you. The fact that Moshe and Aaron could come to Pharaoh, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, each time, each of the plagues, and they could come to Pharaoh and say, let my people go, or else you're going to get blood, or else you're going to get frogs, or else you're going to get the wild animals. And nothing. Pharaoh negotiates, he lets them go, he comes back. It's a fascinating thing. It's a side point, but it's a fascinating study into who Pharaoh is. But the point is that Pharaoh is this evil, evil dictator. And now Pharaoh has taken these Jews that have kissed his toes in that have, they've done some whatever they needed to do to become considered the loyal slaves, the slaves that are worthy of being the ones who will be overseers over the other slaves. And now he's put them in a position of authority. And this position of authority gets to their minds. Listen to this text. Listen to this, my friends. It gets into their minds. When Moshe and Aaron come to Pharaoh the first time, when Moshe and Aaron come to Pharaoh the first time, I hope I'm being clear so far. They come to Pharaoh and they say to Pharaoh, let the Jewish people go free. And how does Pharaoh respond? He says, absolutely not. Who is this God? I don't know who he is. I'm not letting the Jewish people go free. In fact, Moshe and Aaron, you are lazy. You are distracting the Jewish people. They're being lazy, so you want to go worship your God in the desert. And because you're distracting my slaves and taking them away from from serving me, I'm going to make their workload harder. How am I going to make their workload harder? Before they had a certain quota of bricks to fill, but I was the one that provided the straw and the material they needed in order to build the bricks. But now, Moshe, because you're coming and you're distracting them with your desires to go and worship God in the desert, I'm going to make the workload even harder. Now, not only will I not provide them with the bricks, not only will I still demand the same quota of bricks, but no longer will I provide them with the straw and with the equipment they need in order to build the bricks. So what happens? The Jewish people, it gets even worse. And the suffering gets even more intense. And they try and meet the quota and they can't. And they get whipped because of it. And we're going to get to that in a second. Afterwards, the taskmasters see Moshe. I want to read to you what they say to Moshe. They come to Moshe and they say, here, right over here, text number 1, chapter 5, verse 20. These taskmasters, they met Moses and Aaron standing before them when they came out from Pharaoh's presence. This is when the taskmasters had gone into Pharaoh to beg Pharaoh for mercy. And Pharaoh had said to the taskmasters, why are you asking me for mercy? You guys are lazy. You're wasting your time. Moshe and Aaron are distracting you from doing the service that you should be doing. I refuse to allow you to have any break in the labor. You're being lazy. They walk out of Pharaoh's palace. And what do they see? They see Moshe and Aaron are standing there. Verse 21, and they say to them, listen to this, my friends. May the Lord look upon you and judge. For you have brought us into foul odor in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants to place a sword into their hands to kill us. You know what Stockholm Syndrome is? This is Stockholm Syndrome. Here they are saying to Moshe and to Aaron, may the Lord look upon you and judge you, for you have brought us into foul odor in the eyes of Pharaoh. You have placed a sword into their hands to kill us. Meaning, they're saying to Moshe and Aaron, it's not Pharaoh who's an evil man that wants to kill us. It's not Pharaoh who's a bad guy because he's trying to make our life even more miserable. No, it's your fault, Moshe and Aaron. You're the ones that are trying to make our lives worse by asking for our freedom. You understand how mentally enslaved these people have become? Do you understand how mentally enslaved a people has to be? How psychologically enslaved and sunk into this Stockholm Syndrome? Which, you know what Stockholm Syndrome is? Basically, there was some bank hostages in Stockholm, Sweden, that were kept for many weeks, months. I don't know exactly whether by their captors. And when they eventually were saved, these individuals had made relationships with their captors where they were protecting their captors and blaming themselves. And they even tried to help pay for lawyers of the ones that had captured them and harassed them, etc. The point is, do you understand what kind of mental playing with the mind this is? Here the officers are convinced that the one that is at fault for causing the Jewish people to have a greater workload by having to now find their own straw for the bricks, it's not Pharaoh who's the bad guy. It's your fault, Moshe. You gave the sword into their hands in order to kill us. It's fascinating. I'm going to stop for a second. I don't have people here to gauge if I'm going too fast. But do you understand how many times in history have we had this? How many times in history have we had people, whether it was the Kapos, whether it was the Hellenists in the story of Hanukkah, whether it was the Jewish communists called the Yevsetskia, that were the most vicious anti-Semites in communist Russia, who were Jews trying to destroy Judaism. It's terrible. It's a terrible story. And yet, what happens? My friends, I'm going to tell you now an amazing story. An amazing story of heroism. Amazing story. I'm going to go back now a few verses before the verse we just read, where they complain to Moshe and say, Moshe, it's your fault. You're the one that has caused us to be suffering extra by asking for our freedom, by the dear audacity of asking for our freedom. You have put us into a position where we are likely to suffer more. How could you? May God punish you for that. I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to read with you now what happened just a few verses before. Just a few verses before. Sorry, here we go. A few verses before, in verse number 12, Pharaoh has said that the Jewish people need to go gather their own straw in order to make the bricks. Verse 12, so the people scattered throughout the entire land of Egypt to gather a gleaning for stubble. They're looking for straw to make the bricks. Obviously, it takes time to find straw, so they weren't able to finish the quota. And the taskmasters were pressing them, saying, finish your work, the requirement of each day in its day, just as when there was stubble, meaning you have a quota, whatever your quota is, even though in the past the quota was when you were given the material, and now you have to go find the material yourself, the quota is the same. Verse 14, and the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had appointed over them, were beaten. The taskmasters, these Jewish capos, were beaten, saying by the officers, the Egyptian taskmasters, why have you not completed your quota to make bricks like the day before yesterday, neither yesterday, neither today? Let's read Rashi so you understand this verse. Rashi explains, who is being beaten over here? The officers that are being beaten are the Jews. Right over here, the officers were Israelites, and they had pity on their fellows and did not press them. So what happened? They would turn the bricks over to the taskmasters who were Egyptians, and when something was missing from the required amount, the Egyptians, would flog them, the officers, because they did not press the workers. Therefore, those officers merited to become the Sanhedrin, and some of the spirit that was upon Moses was taken a place upon them, as it is said, gathered to be 70 men of the elders of Israel, of those about whom you know the good that they did in Egypt, that they are the elders of the people and its officers. I'm going to get to the second half of Rashi. Let's focus on the first half for a second. Make a line right over here. Do you understand what this is saying? These officers were Israelites, and they had pity on their fellows, and they did not press the Jewish people. These are the Jews that have been appointed, who have been elevated by Pharaoh. These are the Jews that had said, these are the Jews that have been so convinced of the righteousness of Pharaoh that they had said to Moshe, you are the one that's causing us to suffer more by asking for our freedom. And yet, when push comes to shove, and the Jewish people are forced to, and the Egyptian taskmaster saying, where's the quota? And they're beating the Jewish officers. These officers, called the Shotrim in Hebrew, what do? They don't turn to the Jewish slaves, to the Jewish workers, and say, hey, you lowly Jews, where's the quota? Why aren't you providing? We're getting beaten. Rashi tells us they had mercy. They had mercy on these Jews. They were willing to take the beating. They were willing to be whipped. They were willing to be terrorized. They were willing to be beaten by the Egyptian taskmasters because they felt bad for the Jewish people. Do you see this? I want to read this again. The officers of the children of Israel were beating. The officers are Jews. What kind of Jews? Jews that were appointed as capos. Jews that were chosen of all the slaves as the most loyal to the Egyptians, the most easy to manipulate. And they were manipulated. And yet these Jews, they had pity on their fellows and they did not press them. And therefore they came to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians, they saw that was missing. They would flog the officers because these Shotrim, were not beating the workers hard enough. It's crazy. It's beautiful. This is beautiful. This is beautiful. This is Jewish people, heroes, unsung heroes, who believe in the righteousness of the Egyptian cause, who are so convinced of the righteousness of Pharaoh, they're willing to, they blame Moshe and not Pharaoh for the suffering of the Jewish people. And yet when they see the Jewish people are suffering, they're willing to be beaten themselves rather than to take it out and to beat the Jewish people. Reminds me of a story. I'll tell you a story. There's more to this class, but I want to tell you a story. It's called the story of the dancing beer. You ever heard the story of the dancing beer? When I was a kid, there was a video about this story. There was a holy Jew. His name was the Shpoler Zayda. Shpoler Zayda is a discussion what was his real name. He was known by his nickname, the Shpoler Zayda. That's how he was known. A holy Jew. And the story goes that once he was traveling and he came across a town, and he found out that there were Jews in the town that had basically been arrested by the Pirates. The Pirates was the landowner, the squire that owned the land in Poland, where the Jews or anyone that lived in his land was almost like servants and under the mercy of this local landlord. There was no central Polish government and king at the time. And so basically every single Pirates was like the king of his territory, and they could do to the people in their land whatever they wanted as they wanted. So there was a poor Jew that had been fallen behind on the rent or whatever it was, had been arrested and thrown into a dungeon by the pirates. Now, obviously, being in prison does not help you pay your debts. So if the pirates wanted to get paid back by this Jew, he should have thought of something a little bit more effective than throwing him in prison, but that's another discussion. Anyway, the Jew is sitting in prison. Comes the birthday of the pirates, and the pirates is looking for some really good entertainment he can use in order to one second, sorry about that. He's looking for some really good entertainment he can use for the birthday party. And then he has an idea. He's going to make a competition with this Jew. Wait one second. Anyway, he's going to make a competition with this Jew, and he's going to dress him in a beer costume and have a dancing competition between him and the professional dancer he's going to hire. Instead of just hiring dancers are fun. But to add a whole new level of excitement, we're going to put this Jew in a beer costume, and we're going to give the Jew a chance. If he can win the dancing competition against this professional dancer, the pirates will give him his freedom and allow him to go free and back to his inn, and his debts will be absolved. And if the Jew loses the competition, then the Jew will be fed to the beers. That's the competition. Now, of course, I mean, this is Polish entertainment in the times of a few hundred years ago. In the times of the pirates, they could do whatever they wanted. Now, this Jew finds out that he's going to be in the competition. This Jew doesn't know how to dance. This Jew's been in prison for months and months with no exercise. He hasn't been able to walk. He's in a little cramped little dungeon cell. Forget about dancing. Barely been fed any food, a little bit of bread. No energy. He's weak. He's malnourished. He's tired. They're going to put him onto this massive beer costume. That the beer costume alone could weigh who knows how much, make you hot and sweaty and barely able to breathe, and put him up to dance against a professional dancer. How is that fair? But he has no choice, right? So he's crying to God to save him from this terrible situation. Shpoler Zayda hears about this, and the Shpoler Zayda comes and decides to switch places with this Jew. And so he comes to the officer of the prison where the dungeon was. So I'm going to bribe you a few dollars. What do you care which Jew is in there? The pirates will never know which Jew is which. As the Jew is a Jew. Let me go in for a few minutes. He doesn't say that to him. So let me go in for a few minutes just to speak to he bribes the guard to let me for a few minutes to go bring food, to go talk to the Jew that's in prison. So the guard officer is bribed, and he lets the Shpoler Zayda in to go to visit the prisoner. When the Shpoler Zayda goes in to visit the prisoner, the Shpoler Zayda tells him, take my clothing, take my hat, my coat, and everything. I'm going to put on your prison clothing, and you leave and you escape with your family, and I will take your place in prison. When the Jew hears, he says to the Shpoler Zayda, how could I do that? Do you know what's going to happen to me? I'm going to be fed to the beers in a few days. How could I switch places with you? So the Shpoler Zayda says, listen, you have a young family, you have a wife and kids. God will protect me. Don't worry about me. God will protect me. But for you, you have nothing to protect you. This is your chance. You go take my clothing, walk out of the prison, pretend like you're me. The guy won't know the difference. A Jew is a Jew. What does he know the difference of this Jew, that Jew? They all look the same to him. You go take the clothing I gave you, walk out like you're me. I'm going to wear your clothing, and I'm going to take your place in the competition. So the Jew, although he felt bad leaving the Shpola Zayda in this place, he was desperate to escape and to go see his family. Shpola Zayda gave him money, gave him everything, said, take my coat, take my hat, take this bag of money. You go take your family and get out of here. The next train go disappear. And now the Shpola Zayda has to figure out how he's going to survive this contest. How's he going to dance? I mean, he's a little bit stronger than this Jew sitting in prison for months. He prays to God to save him. And that night, Eliyahu HaNavi, Elijah the prophet, comes to visit him in prison. And Eliyahu HaNavi himself teaches his holy Rebbe, the Shpola Zayda, all of the Russian dance moves. Teaches him all the moves. In the meantime, comes the day of the party, and the Russian dancer is drinking, and the party is drinking, and they're all getting drunk. And this Jew comes dressed up in the beer costume. No one can even see what he looks like. And they bring him out to the dance floor, and they're expecting the old Jew to fall on the floor, and and they start dancing and dancing. And Eliyahu HaNavi is there together. Elijah the prophet is there with the Shpola Zayda, helping him. And the Shpola Zayda is dancing and dancing and doing all the moves that Eliyahu HaNavi had taught him until Dancing with the Stars. He danced with the Jews, dancing with Elijah. And to make a long story short, because someone went to the class, eventually the Russian dancer that had been drinking so much he was so sure he would win, falls on the floor. He can't continue anymore. And indeed, the Shpola Zayda wins the contest. The Jew's loan is forgiven. The Jew is allowed to take back his inn and live happily ever after. The point is, here you have a story of a holy, holy Jew. It's a holy Jew, the Shpola Zayda, who was willing to literally take the place of another Jew in prison in order to save his life. Understand? I'm going to take your place. Instead of allowing you to suffer, what do we do when we see someone suffering? We offer condolences. We send a text message. Well, how's your father? How's your mother? If I could do something to help, let me know. They're not going to say anything, but okay, I did my job. I said, let me know if you need help. You know what I'm saying? So I reached out, it's a beautiful mitzvah. I'm not saying it's not beautiful to reach out and to show love and support. It's important and it's beautiful. But at the end of the day, we're not taking their place. We're not taking their place. We're staying to our own. We're staying to our own. Shpola Zayda was a holy, holy Jew, holy man. And yet he was willing to risk his life, not just risk his life, he was willing to exchange places with the Jew in prison to take his place. But the class that we're talking about tonight, the heroes of the Bible that we're discussing tonight, were not holy tzaddikim. They were not the Shpola Zayda. They were not a holy Hasidic Rebbe whose entire life was dedicated to God and to holiness. Tonight's class is about who is me in the Bible. Jewish officers that are slaves, that have been manipulated and emotionally controlled by Pharaoh to such a degree that when Pharaoh makes the slavery worse, instead of blaming Pharaoh, they instead blame Moshe. That's how deeply entrenched in slavery they are. And yet those very same Jewish couples, those very same Jewish officers who are slaves, who are not holy, righteous, great people, they're regular people like me and you. They're regular Jews, not holy, not rabbis, not religious, not great in any way. They're Jewish slaves that have been given authority over other Jewish slaves. When Pharaoh's taskmasters come to them and say, why are the Jews not meeting the quota that they're supposed to be doing? Instead of beating the Jews, the Torah tells us that they had mercy on the Jews, and therefore they allowed themselves to be beaten instead. They allowed themselves to take the suffering and the persecution and the beatings that were meant for the Jewish slaves that weren't meeting the quota, and they took it upon themselves instead. They took it on themselves instead. Beautiful. What's the reward for such a great, tremendous act of bravery? Such heroes. Did you know that there were such heroes? Did you know such heroism existed? Not by rabbis, not by Abraham. The fact that Moshe is a hero, we know. The fact that Batya is a hero, okay, we know she was a Batya, she's the daughter of God, she was a convert, she was a righteous woman, so we know. But that regular slaves were heroes. That regular people like me and you, regular people, not the rabbis, not the Moseses, not the heroes, the regular people. That's amazing. Talk about heroism. So what's their reward, my dear friends? What's the reward for these Jews? You know what the reward is? So the reward, we're going to go back to the Rashi. And we're going to read this Rashi, the second half, where God tells Moshe, therefore, these officers merited to become the Sanhedrin, and the Spirit of God was put upon them. We're going to skip to text number 3. This Rashi is quoting from here. Let me take you to the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, chapter 11. No, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm going to explain to you the story of this text we're going to read. The Jewish people are in the desert. They have bread coming down from the heavens every single day. There's bread coming from the heavens, the manna. But they want meat. It's a famous story, and one day we'll talk about it. They want meat. And they cry out to Moshe, and they say, Moshe, we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt. We remember the fish that we had for free. They're yearning for the food of Egypt. They didn't eat fish. They only saw the Egyptians eating fish, but whatever. They're yearning for it. We remember those good old days, so to say. And Moshe gets very depressed. And Moshe says to God, how do you want me to take care of these people? Moshe says to God, very powerful word. Did I give birth to them? Did I conceive them? They're not my children. Why are you giving me such a heavy burden? I cannot do this anymore alone. God, I give up. So God, Moshe says to God, he says, God, I cannot do this alone anymore. I can't. From where, he says to God, from where will I get meat to feed all of these hundreds of thousands of Jews that are complaining to me that they need food? Where will I get it from? I can't do it. From where will I get meat for all of these people? So God responds to Moses in chapter 11 of the book of Numbers. And he says, the Lord says to Moses, assemble for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the people's elders and officers. And you shall take them to the tent of meeting, and they shall stand there with you. So here Rashi tells us, who are these 70 elders that God is telling Moshe to gather? These are men whom you know to be the people's elders and officers. What does it mean you know them to be the people's elders and officers? Says Rashi, those whom you know that they were appointed as officers over them in Egypt to oversee the rigorous labor. And they had mercy on them, and they were beaten on their account, as it says, the officers of the children of Israel were beaten. That's the verse we just read, verse 14, that we just read a few minutes ago. Here, chapter 5, verse 14. So these officers, whom Pharaoh's taskmaster had appointed over them, and they allowed themselves to be beaten, here's their reward. Now they shall be chosen in their greatness, just as they had suffered in Israel's distress. Now they shall be chosen in their greatness, just as they had suffered in their distress. Beautiful. They suffered with the Jews. Now they're going to be chosen in greatness. Says God to Moses, you shall take these elders, these officers, take them with words. Tell them how fortunate you are that you have been appointed leaders of the children of the omnipresent one. And they shall stand there with you. What does that mean they should stand there with you? So the Israelites should see and treat them with esteem and honor, saying, how beloved are those who have entered with Moses to hear the speech from the mouth of the Holy One. Blessed is he. This is their reward, my friends, that Moshe is coming to them and saying, you have been chosen in front of all of Israel because you stood with them in their suffering, because you took their place and you suffered for them, and you took the blows and the whips and the beatings of the Egyptian taskmasters instead of allowing the Jews to be beaten. Now you will enter into the Mishkan, you will enter to the holy presence of God, and you will hear the words of God direct from the mouth of the Holy One, blessed be he. Verse 17, God says to Moshe, I will come down and speak with you there, and I will increase the spirit that is upon you and bestow it upon them. Then they will bear the burden of the people with you, so that you need not bear it alone. There's a beautiful commentary that explains as follows. What does it mean that then they will bear the burden of the people with you? Not that I'm choosing now all of a sudden to serve the people. They have already bear the burden of the people. This burden of the people was already upon them. Just look at their backs, pull up their shirt. You see the whip marks and the scars of the beatings? They have already borne the burden of the Jewish people. They have been there with you. They have suffered for the Jewish people. And therefore, they already have it. They've already carried the burden. There's no reason for you to carry it alone. You already have people that have proven not to be holy, not to be scholars, not to be righteous, not to be charismatic or to be politicians. You have people that have proven that when they see someone else suffering, they're willing to change their place. They're willing to take personal responsibility for the situation of somebody else and to say, I am willing to be instead of them. I am willing to suffer instead of them. Heroism. These are the heroes of the Torah that are forgotten. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing story. It's an amazing story. I'm going to end up with a story of a Jew who was willing to take responsibility for something that was not his fault. I'm going to tell you a story of a Jew who many of you know by name. When I'm going to tell you his name, you'll know who he is. He became one of the richest Jews to ever live. His name was Moshe Anshel Rothschild. Now, I'm sure that many of you have heard of the Rothschild family. The Rothschild family is one of the most famous, illustrious families that exist in the Jewish world, and they deserve it. They were tremendous. They were billionaires by today's standards. They had the largest banking system, and they supported tremendous amounts of charity. How did the Rothschilds become so famous? How did they become so wealthy? So then I'm going to end the lesson with another story. So we told you the story, the unsung story of Jewish heroes called the Jewish officers, the Shotrim, that stood up for the Jewish people at a time of tremendous suffering and distress, and stood up for them in order to defend them and to take their place in suffering. I'm going to end with another story of another Jew who took responsibility for something that was not his fault. And because of that, he was blessed not to be able to speak to God directly like the elders were, that they became the new elders of the Jewish people, but instead he was blessed with tremendous, tremendous wealth to become one of the wealthiest Jews to ever live in the course of history. Here's the story. There was a small city in Galicia. There was a very famous holy Jew. His name was Rabbi Hershel Cherketover. Hershel Cherketover was a holy rabbi, a righteous person who was day and night taking care of people, helping people, guiding people, teaching people. And he was known to collect money for a lot of widows and orphans, and poor people would always come to him asking for help in their many different issues and troubles and sorrows and distresses that they had to face with. And the Cherketover Rav, as he was known, refused to ever not help somebody. You knew if you came to him, he would do something to help you. And therefore, he was always collecting money. People knew that they gave him money, and he would use it to help poor people. And eventually, he decided that it was too much for him to do by himself. And so the Hershel Cherketover decided he had to get a shamash, an assistant, a secretary. So he hired a young man whose name was Anshel Moses Rothschild. Anshel Moses Rothschild was a poor young man, unmarried, a young bacher. And the rabbi hired this guy as his assistant. And he was a very, very loyal assistant. They became dear friends. And after a few years, finally Anshel Moshe got married, and he went to live in a nearby town where his father-in-law lived. And there he decided he was going to open a store and go into business in the store. And he said goodbye to he got married. He said, it's time for me to open my own business, take care of my family. The Cherketover Rav didn't pay him a lot of money. I guess he was just an assistant, a secretary. And so they said goodbye, and that was it. This was shortly before Pesach. A month goes by, and now it's Pesach time. And the Cherketover Rav is doing B'dikas Chametz. And he's searching in his desk. He had a hidden place where he kept all of the money he collected for the poor people. And he collected lots of money. Always before Pesach is the busiest time of the year for these rabbis. They would collect a lot of money before Passover to give out on the day before Passover. all the poor people will come to get money, and he would give them all the money that they needed to take care of the Pesach needs. And now he's searching, and all of a sudden, that bag, a 500 golden ruble he had saved up money for poor people, is gone. And he couldn't believe it. He was shocked. He searches everywhere inside. He had a secret hiding, like a secret false drawer in the desk where the money was, and the money's not there. And he searches, maybe it fell under the desk, under the side of the desk, and he looks in behind it. He takes the whole desk apart, and the money is nowhere to be found. And now all he knows, tomorrow, all these poor people are going to come to him before Passover, and there's no way of helping them. He's supposed to pay for the Pesach meals. He's supposed to pay the grocers and the tailors, everyone that's getting stuff done for these poor people, and now he has no way of paying them. Not only is he sad about losing the money, he starts to think, where could the money have gone? Who possibly could have taken the money? The only person that knew where this money was hidden was his shamish, his assistant, Anshel Moses Rothschild. But to accuse Anshel Moses Rothschild of stealing money, impossible. He's so loyal, so faithful. He couldn't imagine that this assistant, Anshel Moses, would have stolen the money. But on the other hand, who else could have taken it? No one else knew it was there. And back and forth all night he couldn't sleep. And he realizes in the morning, the only person that possibly could have been is him. No one else knew where the money was. However, it was already that night is Pesach. It was too late to go travel to the other town where his assistant had moved to with his wife. And the whole Pesach, he was tossing, and people were coming to him all day, and he borrowed money to be able to help people. And over the course of the holiday of Pesach, he starts to imagine in his mind, starts to be what we call melamed chus, to try and find a merit. Maybe he just borrowed it so he can build up his business. He needed money to open a store, and how else would he have the money to open the store? As he said, his father gave him money. Maybe he had to just borrow it, and he didn't tell anyone. Anyway, he decides immediately after the holiday Pesach, he's going to go travel to his old assistant and to ask him if he took the money, to give him a chance to come clean and to pay back the money he had borrowed from his old teacher. So he travels immediately the day after Pesach. He comes to visit his old assistant. And at first, when Anshel Moses sees that his old, the Rav, the rabbi comes to visit him, he welcomes him in, come in. And then when the rabbi says to him, he's excited, and he starts to say to me, the money has been missing from my desk. Nobody knew about it besides for you. I'm sure you didn't mean to take it to steal it. I'm sure you only wanted to borrow it for a short while, but I need the money for all the poor people. Otherwise, they'll starve. And as he's speaking, he sees Anshel Moses is beginning to cry. He's crying. It's clear he took the money. He's crying. Without saying a word, his whole face turns red. He's so embarrassed. He feels that the rabbi feels bad that he even brought it up. On the other hand, he feels, thank God I didn't accuse him of stealing on purpose. I right away assumed that he took it to return it and he needed it for his business. I didn't make a big deal about it. I didn't tell people in the community about it. And Anshel Moses goes to his drawer where his money box is in this business he just started, and he takes out all the money in the drawer and gives it to the rabbi. They count it up, but it's not even half of the money that was missing from the bag, from the fake drawer of the rabbi's desk. And with deep regret, Anshel Moses tells the rabbi, I promise you I will give you every penny back. Give me a few months. I promise you I will pay everything back. Anyway, the rabbi was very, very relieved. And yet at the same time, he felt sad like that the story was over. Glad that he realized that his mistake, and the tears in his eyes were proof that he regretted his mistake. And okay, Baruch Hashem, the story's over. They thank hands. And every week, Anshel Moses works as hard as he could. He works till very, very late at night. And he works so late. And every week, he sends an envelope to the rabbi with whatever money he was able to put aside and to save. And every week, he keeps on sending the money until he almost basically paid up the full amount. One day, a few months later, the police chief comes knocking on the door of the rabbi of Rabbi Herschel of Chakachaga. He says, come to the police station. For a rabbi to be called to the police station is never a good thing. So he goes to the police station, gets very, very worried. And there the police chief starts to ask him, says, tell me, did you have a robbery recently? Was your money stolen from you? Rabbi says, yeah, I had a robbery, but it wasn't really a robbery. It was my assistant took it, but he already acknowledged his guilt, and he's paying. He gave me back some of the money. He's paying back every week. He almost finished paying off the entire money he took. So it's all, well, you don't have to worry about it, the officer. So the officer says, tell me. He opens his drawer and pulls out a bag. He says, do you recognize this bag? Rabbi looks with shock. Says, that's my bag. That's my money. That's the bag. So then the rabbi brings out, with handcuffs, a woman. Says, do you recognize this woman? Sure enough, he looks. That's his cleaning lady. He barely even knew the cleaning lady. He didn't. He looked at her. She looks very familiar. She says, this is your cleaning lady, Rabbi. And this cleaning lady, she stole your money. And we found proof. Basically, she took the money. She found when she was cleaning the house for Pesach, somehow she came across this hidden drawer. She couldn't resist the temptation. She saw this money in the hidden drawer. She took it. And she quit her job. And she told the Rebbe that she was sick. She had to leave. But in the meantime, she quit her job. She started spending money like crazy. She went to the store. She bought new boots. She bought this. And her neighbors became suspicious of her. So one of her neighbors reported her that she must have stolen money because she's spending money like crazy. And sure enough, we went to go search her house. And as we came to her house, we saw her in the back of her garden digging up the money that was hidden in the tree in her backyard. And we arrested her. We said, where's the money from? And she readily confessed that it was money from your house. The rabbi's overjoyed. But the police chief said, I don't understand. Why did you tell me that your assistant, your old secretary, your shamish, is paying for the money? He didn't steal it. The money was here in the city. He never left. We had it. It was under her tree. So the rabbi said, I don't know. I'm just as confused as you. Ansel Moses confessed. I went to his house and I said, I don't accuse you. I'm sure you just borrowed it. You didn't mean it. And he right away confessed. So right away, the Rebbe goes straight to the home of Ansel Moses Rothschild. He comes to the home of Ansel Moses Rothschild and he comes running to his home and immediately, without even a chance to say a word, he falls on the shoulder, begins to cry to him. He says, tell me, why did you say you took it? Why did you tell me that you took the money when it wasn't your money? You didn't steal it. You were innocent. Why didn't you tell me you were innocent? And Ansel Moses says to him, what should I tell you? You came into my home, and when I saw how sad you looked, and I saw how troubled you were by the fact that you wouldn't be able to help all of the people that you had borrowed, that you had collected tzedakah from, and how all these poor people were counting on you to help them pay for their Pesach needs, how could I deny it? How could I not help them? And so for the last few months, I haven't taken home a penny from my work. I've been working. I couldn't deny. I felt so bad for you that I felt I have to take responsibility and pay back the money. And therefore, the Helshah Chakachava cried on him and blessed him and said, I give you back the money that you gave me, and I bless you to take this money and invest it and become very, very wealthy. And first, he didn't want to take the money back. So eventually, he agreed to take it as an investment with the rabbi's blessings. And from then, he lived till 1934. And Meir Anshel became the Baron Rothschild, the extremely wealthy benefactor who helped many, many Jews. And the secret to his wealth, how he became the wealthy person that he was all in the merit that he took responsibility for the pain and the suffering of other Jews. When he realized that other Jews would be suffering, wouldn't have food for Pesach, even though he was innocent, he said, I take it upon myself to be responsible for them. And that was why he was able to take care of the Jewish people. Okay, my friends, I hope that the Facebook is working. And I wish you all a Laila Tov, a good night full of blessings, and only good things.